The air split with a hiss of white smoke. In the center of Halotech's glass-walled campus, the Lyra V-12 hypercar heralded as the crown jewel of American engineering shuddered like a wounded beast. Its flawless carbon fiber hood vibrated under the strain vents, choking on the stench of burning polymers. Executives in tailored suits scattered backward, shielding their eyes from the eruption of steam. And there, in the chaos, stood CEO Brielle Halverson, her heart hammering against the frame of her silk blouse. The system alert flashing across the control console chilled her blood. Coolant failure. Quantum core. Imminent cascade. This wasn't just a breakdown. It was the death of a $4.6 million prototype and the public disgrace of her entire company. "Move back, security, clear the square," someone barked. Cameras hovered from drones, above catching every second of Halotech's humiliation. Then, from beyond the line of panicked engineers, a voice cut through the smoke, calm, firm, and almost reckless. "I can fix it." Heads turned. Out of the haze stepped a man in a faded olive-green military jacket, its seams worn thin from years of use. He looked nothing like an engineer. His boots were scuffed, his hands calloused, his hair a tangle of long waves tied at the back of his neck. A simple janitor's badge glinted against his chest. Dawson Cole. For a heartbeat, the crowd froze. His words hung in the air like heresy. The CEO of Halotech narrowed her eyes at the intruder. Brielle's voice cracked, half astonishment, half scorn. "You're the custodian. Get him out of here." Two guards moved instantly. Dawson didn't resist. He simply kept his gaze on the trembling machine, on the digital countdown that only he seemed to understand. "You have less than 20 minutes before the coolant collapse eats through the quantum stabilizer," he said evenly. "And when it does, you'll lose the entire car." The guard seized his arms. Dawson's calm never wavered. "I know exactly where the breach is." KJ 447, the memo no one listened to. The name froze Brielle mid-breath. KJ 447. It was a ghost file buried deep in her company's archives, something her legal team had brushed aside years ago. How could a janitor know? Her pulse thudded. She shook herself free of the thought. "Take him out," she snapped. "Now." The guards dragged him away, his voice fading into the roar of the crowd. "Remember this. I can fix it." If you were standing there watching a janitor in rags claim he could save the most advanced car on Earth, would you believe him? Or would you laugh? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters as much as the story we're about to tell. The smoke thickened. Brielle inhaled the sharp sting of melted wiring, her mind racing. She had built her reputation on precision control perfection. Yet in this moment, she felt small, cornered by a malfunction her team could not solve, and by a stranger's words that echoed louder than the alarms. How did he know behind her René Dubois, her deputy chief engineer, whispered, "Ma'am, did he just say KJ 447? Brielle stiffened. "It's irrelevant. That memo was nothing." Nothing, René's brow furrowed. "That was before my time, but I've heard rumors. A field mechanic in the Defense Corps flagged a flaw in the Lyra's prototype coolant system. They said he could map the breakdown to the second." The name on the file. She stopped herself. Brielle's throat tightened. She didn't need to hear the name. She already knew. Across the campus, Dawson Cole sat on the edge of the security truck's step hands cuffed in front of him. He didn't look like a man pleading for attention. He looked like a man remembering a battlefield, eyes fixed on the smoke curling toward the winter sky. Inside his pocket, his fingers brushed the worn wood of a small pencil, Marley's gift before school that morning. "For luck, Daddy. Because you always fix things." He exhaled. He didn't care about the cameras or the executives or the sneers. He cared about the machine, because the machine was the battlefield, and saving it was muscle memory. And somewhere inside that smoke, he knew was the beginning of something bigger than one car, bigger than one company. The Lyra shuddered violently. The digital timer bled red across the main screen. 34. Brielle swallowed hard. Pride told her to walk away. Fear told her to run. Yet a tiny, traitorous whisper in her heart repeated his words. I can fix it. The Lyra V12 hissed like a wounded animal, smoke clawing upward through the slits in its hood. Engineers scrambled with data pads, their fingers darting across screens, searching for an answer buried in codes and equations. None dared look their CEO in the eye. Brielle Halverson stood rigid, arms folded tight across her chest, the chill of the evening sinking into her bones, despite the firestorm before her. Her pride demanded silence, but her mind buzzed with one unshakable thought. That file was never supposed to resurface. It had been dismissed, ridiculed, quietly, buried. And yet moments ago, her janitor had spoken of it like scripture. Ma'am Renee Dubois whispered again, hovering at her side. I swear I've heard of him. Dawson Cole. It rings a bell from the old defense projects. I think he enough. Brielle snapped, her voice colder than the wind cutting across the plaza. He's no one. And this car is our future. Still, her eyes betrayed her composure, flicking to where Dawson sat in the security truck. He didn't beg. He didn't shout. He just watched the smoke curl into the night, as though he'd seen it all before. Inside the truck, Dawson sat, hunched, his wrists red from the cuffs. The guards kept their distance, their eyes narrowing whenever his lips moved, as though he might whisper the car back to life. He didn't need schematics or access codes. He'd built machines under fire with bullets, carving sparks into the hull of helicopters, with soldiers screaming for their lives. He didn't need equipment, just his hands, his instinct and time. And time, he knew, was bleeding away. He murmured to himself, eyes tracing the rhythm of the smoke. 18 minutes until collapse. Coolant cycles misaligned. Phase drift, 0.03. KJ447 wasn't a theory. It's here right in front of them. One of the guards sneered. What are you, some kind of prophet janitor? Dawson lifted his gaze slowly. No, he said. Just the ghost of the man who designed what you're about to lose. Brielle's phone buzzed sharply in her pocket. She answered with a clipped, yes. On the other end, a junior analyst's voice shook. Ma'am, we traced the name on memo KJ447. It matches with a former Defense Corps engineer. Codebreaker Mechanic Tactical Systems. Name Dawson Cole. The analyst hesitated. He served 15 years. Dishonorably discharged after a closed tribunal. Charges. Sealed. Brielle's throat tightened. Sealed, yes, ma'am. But his designs, the voice lowered as if the walls might hear. Some of them are still classified. She hung up. Her stomach churned anger and fear intertwining like smoke and fire. The man in that truck wasn't just a janitor. He was a ghost of her industry. Someone erased someone who wasn't supposed to exist in her world anymore. And yet he had looked at her machine once and spoken the truth. Renee Brielle said, finally, her voice softer now, almost reluctant. Find me that file. KJ447. Full text. Renee blinked, then hurried toward the lab wing, her boots echoing against the marble tiles. The crowd thinned as executives excused themselves, muttering about liability and insurance. The drone cameras, however, stayed locked on broadcasting every flicker of smoke into cyberspace. Brielle could already imagine tomorrow's headlines. Halo Tech's dream car collapses in public disaster. She clenched her fists. Failure wasn't an option, not for her, not after clawing her way to the top of a field, dominated by men who swore she'd never last. But standing at the edge of ruin, she felt the weight of another shadow, her father. A Marine who had abandoned his family in pursuit of duty. A man who taught her control, but never loyalty. Every crisis smelled like him, smoke, oil, and betrayal. And now another veteran stood before her, threatening to shatter the illusion of perfection she had built. In the truck, Dawson closed his eyes, picturing Marley's face. Her smile that morning gap-toothed and bright. Her voice soft but insistent. "You can fix anything, Daddy. Just don't forget your pencil." His hand twitched in his pocket where the small pencil rested. He drew strength from its simplicity. He didn't need recognition. He didn't need glory. He just needed to keep fixing machines' lives, whatever was broken. Renee returned tablet, clutched tight, her expression pale. "Ma'am," she whispered, "the memo is real. It's signed Dawson Cole. Dated 12 years ago. Predicts the exact failure we're watching right now." Brielle's eyes narrowed, her breath catching in her throat. 12 years ago, while she was still fighting for recognition, while she was still proving herself against every sneer and whisper in boardrooms, he had already seen this flaw. A ghost beneath the hood of her empire. The Lyra coughed again, its quantum hum faltering. Red lights bled across the dashboard. The timer ticked downward. 18:27. Brielle turned her head just slightly toward the man chained in the security truck. For the first time, her gaze lingered, not as a CEO looking at a custodian, but as a daughter haunted by the failures of a father, and as a woman staring at the one man who might yet save her empire. Her jaw tightened. Pride was her armor. Control was her religion. But both cracked when she whispered almost too low for anyone to hear. "What if he really can fix it?" The campus buzzed with tension long after the smoke began to thin. Executives whispered in corners, drones hovered like vultures, and the Lyra V-12 sat wounded in the square, its sleek bodywork glinting under the floodlights, a masterpiece on the verge of ruin. But miles away, in a quiet two-bedroom apartment on the south side of the city, another scene unfolded. A girl with auburn curls and eyes too bright for bedtime sat cross-legged on the floor, pencil in hand, sketching a crooked picture of a car that looked suspiciously like the Lyra. She paused every so often, chewing the eraser, as though weighing the mechanics of the drawing. "Daddy always knows where the gears go," Marley whispered to herself. She added one more wheel off-center, but full of intent. The clock on the wall ticked past 9. She should have been asleep hours ago, but Marley rarely slept, until she heard the shuffle of boots outside the door, the familiar creak of the lock, and the smell of grease and soap that meant her father was home. Tonight, though, the air stayed still. At Halotech, Dawson sat in the dimly lit guardroom, cuffs now loosened, but still resting against his wrists. The pencil in his pocket dug into his side, its weight both anchor and promise. Marley had pressed it into his hand that morning, before school, insisting it was magic. "You always fix things," she'd said. "But sometimes you need a little luck." He had laughed, brushing her cheek with his thumb. "Machines aren't about luck, sweetheart. They're about trust. Trust in the parts, trust in the person who built it." "But I trust you," she'd replied matter-of-factly, with the kind of certainty only a child could have. The memory tightened his chest now. Machines, he understood. People, especially the ones in power, were harder. Brielle paced the executive corridor, heels echoing like a metronome of nerves. She should have been poring over data barking orders, declaring control. Instead, her mind kept circling back to the sight of that man, his calm, the way he read the failure without touching a single sensor. Why did that unnerve her more than the smoke itself? She caught her reflection in the window, sharp lines, hair pinned with precision eyes that rarely blinked in front of boardrooms. And yet, she saw the faintest tremor there, a flicker she hadn't let anyone see since childhood. Her father's shadow loomed again. He had once told her that soldiers break before machines do, that people couldn't be trusted with anything that mattered. She had built her empire on proving him wrong, surrounding herself with algorithms and controls that didn't betray her. And now, a janitor, an ex-soldier, stood at the edge of her empire, daring her to believe otherwise. In the guardroom, Dawson leaned back, closing his eyes. A guard flipped through his file on a tablet, scoffing. "Veteran, huh? Dishonorable discharge. No wonder you're mopping floors." Dawson didn't answer. He'd lived through worse than mockery. Labels didn't matter. What mattered was Marley's drawing pinned on their fridge, a shaky picture of him holding a wrench surrounded by stars. She believed in him when the world wouldn't. And that belief had weight, enough to keep him steady while the world tried to erase him. Meanwhile, Renee found Brielle again, clutching a tablet. "Ma'am," I dug deeper. That memo wasn't just an observation. It was a full repair strategy. Handwritten notes, annotations. It even sketches an emergency workaround using, get this, a graphite-based sealant. Brielle froze. Graphite. The core of any pencil. She remembered the pencil sticking out of Dawson's pocket when security dragged him away. Not a tool of desperation, but of preparation. Her throat tightened. She whispered to herself, almost in disbelief. He knew even then. At home, Marley curled beneath her blanket at last, clutching the pencil case her father had given her. Inside was a note he'd written in his blocky script. "If a machine can be fixed, so can we." She smiled, whispering into the dark. "Come home soon, Daddy. Fix it." Back on campus, Brielle stood in the observation bay overlooking the Lyra. The timer on the dashboard flickered to "0:12:49. Each second felt heavier than the last. Her engineers worked frantically, but their eyes betrayed them. They didn't have the answer. Not one of them could see the ghost in the machine. Her hand hovered over her phone, torn between pride and pragmatism. Trust was not her language, but neither was failure. She exhaled long and slow and whispered into the silence. "Bring him back." In the guardroom, Dawson opened his eyes as the door clicked open. A guard's expression had changed from smug to subdued. "The boss wants another look at you." Dawson rose, slowly, the pencil in his pocket, pressing against his chest like a heartbeat. He straightened his back, not as a janitor this time, but as the man he used to be, the man his daughter still believed he was. The conference room was silent, except for the faint hum of servers beyond the glass walls. Brielle Halverson sat at the head of the obsidian table, her fingers tapping against a sleek tablet. Across the screen glowed a document. Most of Halotech's engineers had never seen Technical Memorandum KJ-447. Her eyes swept the first lines. Filed under Defense Corps Division. Author Dawson R. Cole. Every word pulled her further into a story she hadn't asked to read. Diagrams sketched by hand detailed the coolant system's fragile architecture. Calculations precise to the millisecond mapped the failure curve. And at the margin, a scrawled warning. "Ignore this, and you gamble with lives." Brielle's throat tightened. The style of the notes was unmistakable, blunt, unpolished, born from the field rather than the lab. This wasn't the language of academia or polished board reports. It was the language of survival. Renee Dubois shifted in her seat beside her. "It's him, ma'am. The janitor." "No," she corrected herself, the engineer. "This memo is his." Brielle swallowed. 12 years old. Yes, and still accurate. Renee hesitated, then lowered her voice. "We all dismissed him tonight, but if this is true, he saw this flaw long before we ever dreamed of the Lyra V12. The CEO's gaze hardened. Memories stirred her father's voice, gruff and cruel. "Soldiers don't build. They break. Never trust them with creation." She had built her empire to silence that voice, to prove control belonged to her. And yet here she was, staring at proof that a soldier had predicted what her empire's brightest minds had missed. In the hallway outside, Dawson waited under guard. His wrists bore the faint red imprint of cuffs, but his posture was steady. shoulders squared as if back in uniform. He could feel the weight of eyes on him, some curious, others hostile. The door opened. Renee beckoned him in. He stepped into the conference room, the smell of glass cleaner and engine oil clinging faintly to his clothes. His eyes caught the screen instantly. KJ-447, his own ghost staring back at him. Brielle's tone was clipped, controlled though her pulse thundered in her ears. "Is this your work?" Dawson didn't flinch. "It is. You filed this as a Defense Corps engineer." "Yes." His eyes held hers steady. "They told me to drop it. Said it was paranoia. Said the system was flawless. But I don't believe in flawless machines." Her jaw tightened. "And now you mop floors in my building." "I fix what's in front of me," he said simply. "Doesn't matter if it's a billion-dollar engine or a broken chair in the lobby. Everything deserves another chance." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Brielle hated how those words reached her deeper than they should have. Renee broke the tension, gesturing to the screen. "Ma'am, if his analysis is correct, and I believe it is, our repair window is shrinking. We need to decide whether to let him attempt a fix." Brielle's gaze snapped to Dawson. "Tell me something, Mr. Cole. Why step forward tonight? Why risk humiliation?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because your machine doesn't deserve to die for someone else's pride." The word struck her like a blade. For years she had built walls around her heart, walls of control, perfection, distance. Now a stranger's blunt honesty cracked them in an instant, but another memory pressed forward. Her father's boots echoing against hardwood, the door slamming as he left for deployment. His silence, his abandonment. Veterans were chaos, she reminded herself. They didn't fix things. They left ruins behind. Her voice chilled again. "Or maybe you just want back in. Maybe this is about ego." Dawson didn't blink. "Ego doesn't keep my daughter fed. Ego didn't put this pencil in my pocket this morning." He tapped the outline of Marley's gift. "She trusts me. That's enough." Renee's eyes softened at the mention of his daughter. Brielle felt something stir too, though she forced it down. The tension broke when alarms flashed across the room. A voice over comms shouted, "Countdown at 12 minutes." System destabilization accelerating. Brielle's pulse hammered. All eyes turned to her. The weight of a company, a reputation, an empire bore down on her shoulders. She looked once more at the memo on the screen, his memo. She could dismiss it again. Dismiss him. But if she did, the Lyra V-12 would collapse before the world's eyes. Her fingers curled into fists. She had always lived by control, but control was slipping through her hands like smoke. She exhaled sharply. "Give him 20 minutes." The room stirred. Gasps, protests, disbelief. Renee's face lit with determination. Dawson simply nodded, as though he'd been waiting for the order his entire life. Brielle leaned forward, her voice firm but trembling at its edges. 20 minutes. Under supervision. Fail, and it's on you. His reply was calm, resolute. "Then, I won't fail." As the guards escorted Dawson toward the wounded, Lyra Brielle lingered behind her eyes, fixed on the memo glowing against the glass wall. The signature at the bottom, Dawson R. Cole, burned into her mind. She whispered not to Renee, not to the engineers, but to the ghost of her past she could never quite silence. "You were wrong, Dad. Not every soldier breaks things." And with that, she turned to follow the man who claimed he could fix what her empire could not. The night air outside the Halotech campus had grown sharper, colder, as though the city itself held its breath. Inside the barricaded square, floodlights illuminated the wounded Lyra V-12, its polished body streaked with soot smoke, still whispering from the vents. Engineers circled like vultures, their movements frantic but uncertain. And in the middle of it all walked Dawson Cole. His boots echoed on the concrete, deliberate and steady, A man carrying more than a toolbox. He carried the weight of every mistake, every dismissal, every whispered insult, since the tribunal that had ended his military career. 20 minutes, Brielle Halverson reminded him as she followed her heels, clicking like a judge's gavel behind him. That's all you get. Nothing more. Dawson didn't turn. 20's enough. Her jaw clenched. He said it with the kind of certainty she hated. Certainty born not of arrogance, but of a man who'd been tested in fire and survived. As he approached, the Lyra Renee intercepted him with a tablet pressed to her chest. Mr. Cole Dawson. If you don't mind, I have to ask. Were you really in the corps? I've seen your name before, but... Her words trailed off when she caught his eyes. They were not the eyes of a janitor. They were the eyes of someone who had seen life hang by threads thinner than copper wiring. Yes, he said simply. I was there. She swallowed, then spoke more quietly. I think we need confirmation. The board, the press, they'll need more than just a name on a memo. Brielle seized on the hesitation. Exactly. I won't gamble Halo Tech's future on a ghost story. Renee's thumbs danced across the tablet, pulling up a secured call line. There's only one person who can settle this, someone who would know. The screen flickered, then steadied into the lined, weathered face of General Leonard, retired, but still sharp as steel. His voice came through gravelly skeptical. Renee, why are you calling me at this hour? Renee swallowed. General, we've got a situation with the Lyra prototype, coolant failure. And we've got a man here. Dawson Cole. He says he filed memo KJ447 12 years ago. The general's face, stoic at first, faltered. His eyes sharpened. Repeat that name. Dawson Cole, she said. A pause. Then Leonard leaned closer to the camera, his voice hardening. I know him. Brielle crossed her arms, her skepticism fighting against a growing unease. Then tell me, who is he really? The general's gaze shifted, locking onto Dawson through the lens. He's the reason I'm alive. Silence fell over the room like a dropped curtain. Leonard continued, his voice heavy with memory. Afghanistan 2010. Our bird took fire, rotor shredded, hydraulics bleeding out. We had less than 4 minutes before the desert heat cooked us alive. Every mechanic said it couldn't be done. But Dawson, he tore into that chopper with nothing but a welding kit and a spool of wire. Fixed it in 3 minutes, 36 seconds. Got 4 men, including me, back in the air. Saved our lives. He leaned back, his eyes narrowing. If he says he can fix your car, believe him. He doesn't bluff. Brielle felt the blood drain from her face. She wanted to argue, to push back, but the weight of the general's words pressed down like iron. This wasn't a janitor. This was a man whose fingerprints were still etched into the survival of soldiers, into history itself. Dawson remained silent. He didn't bask in the recognition, didn't even flinch. He only nodded once, his voice calm. That was then. This is now. The general barked a laugh, low and dry, still the same old Cole. You've got 12 minutes, son. Make 'em count. The call cut off. Renee looked at Brielle, her eyes wide with something close to awe. You heard him, ma'am. He saved a general. He can save the Lyra. Brielle's pulse thundered. Her empire was built on flawless machines, on control, on keeping the human variable out of the equation. And yet, here was living proof that sometimes survival depended on human instinct alone. Her pride screamed to dismiss him, but the countdown glared back at her from the Lyra's dashboard, Weorwa 1142. She forced the words out through gritted teeth. Fine, he has his 20 minutes. But not a second more. Dawson stepped closer to the Lyra, his fingers brushing the scorched hood like a surgeon feeling for a pulse. The car seemed to breathe under his touch, its hum broken, uneven. He closed his eyes for a moment, hearing the machine the way another man might hear music. Behind him, Brielle folded her arms tighter. Watching him stirred something she hadn't felt in years. Something dangerous. Trust. And she hated herself for it. Dawson pulled a small roll of copper wire from his pocket, along with a battered utility knife. The guards exchanged incredulous looks. "Where's your toolkit?" one sneered. "This is it," Dawson said. "I don't need toys, just time." The guard shook his head, muttering under his breath. But Brielle's voice cut sharp. "Let him work." For the first time, her tone carried no disdain, only command. As Dawson crouched beside the car, Marley's voice echoed in his mind. "You can fix anything, Daddy." He tightened his grip on the pencil in his pocket. He didn't believe in miracles, but he believed in her faith. And sometimes that was enough. The Lyra V12 sat like a fallen titan beneath the floodlights, smoke rising from its hood in ragged plumes. The countdown on its quantum display blinked an unforgiving red. 11:00. Every second carved away pride money and the veneer of perfection Halo Tech had spent years crafting. Around the car, engineers muttered technical jargon, but their eyes betrayed panic. None stepped forward. All of them looked instead at the man crouching with nothing but a length of copper wire, a scrap of polymer tubing, and the stub of a pencil in his pocket. Dawson Cole, janitor, veteran, ghost of a buried past. Brielle Halverson stood with arms folded, her jaw set tight as steel. She didn't want to admit it, but her empire now rested in his hands. And she hated the helplessness of it. Dawson slid his palm along the scorched hood, listening as much as feeling. Machines spoke if you knew how to listen, the groan of failing circuits, the rattle of dying gears. And tonight, the Lyra was screaming. "Coolant breach at the micro valve," he murmured more to himself than anyone else. "She's bleeding graphite. Needs a seal," an engineer scoffed. "We don't have the parts for that here. You'd need a lab-grade compound." Dawson reached into his pocket and pulled out Marley's pencil. Its yellow paint chipped the eraser worn to a nub. He turned it slowly between his fingers, as though it were more precious than any titanium tool. "This will do." The room erupted in disbelief. "You can't be serious." "That's ridiculous. Are you trying to make us a laughingstock?" But Dawson didn't flinch. He snapped the pencil cleanly in two, exposing the graphite core, then peeled the casing with his knife until a thin rod of shimmering black remained. "Graphite is carbon," he said evenly. "Conductive, stable under heat. Used it in field repairs when the desert ate through our composites. With a little polymer, it'll hold." Brielle's lips parted as if to argue, but the memory of the general's words came back. If he says he can fix it, believe him. She shut her mouth. For once, silence felt heavier than control. Dawson worked quickly, improvising like a surgeon in a war zone. He stripped copper wire with steady hands, binding it tight against the pencil graphite, creating a makeshift bridge. Sweat rolled down his temples, but his movements were sure, precise, as though he had rehearsed this moment his entire life. "Hold the light steady," he ordered. The guards hesitated until Brielle's voice cut sharp. "Do it." Floodlights swung lower, catching every glint of copper and graphite as Dawson wove the fragile circuit. His breath came slow, deliberate. He didn't need perfection. He needed resilience. Behind him, whispers rose among the engineers. "He's insane. No, look at his hands. He knows what he's doing." God help us, he might actually pull this off. Brielle watched her chest tight. It wasn't just the work that unsettled her. It was the look in his eyes, calm, focused, relentless. The same look she remembered in her father's eyes right before he left and never returned. But this man was different. She could see it in the way he whispered under his breath, not to himself, but as though speaking to someone unseen. Marley. The realization struck her with an unexpected pang. He wasn't working for glory or validation. He was working for his daughter. and for reasons she didn't want to admit, that shook her more than the failing car. Dawson pressed the improvised graphite seal into the coolant valve, securing it with melted polymer tubing. The smell of scorched plastic filled the air as he used nothing but the friction of stripped copper wire to fuse it in place. It was crude, ugly, even, but effective. 3 minutes to set, he muttered. Then we test. Brielle stepped forward despite herself. That thing will hold. He glanced at her, a spark of challenge in his eyes. You want pretty, hire an artist. You want survival, trust a soldier. The words cut sharper than she expected. For the first time, she didn't have an answer. The countdown flashed, 0 to 6:45. Every second dripped tension into the square. The crowd that had once mocked now stood silent, watching a man armed with nothing more than forgotten tools defy a billion-dollar catastrophe. Renee leaned close to Brielle, whispering, I've never seen hands move like that, not even in the lab. Brielle didn't answer. She couldn't tear her eyes away. Against her will, she felt a flicker of something she had long buried hope. At last, Dawson stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow. Time to breathe. He gestured toward the ignition console. Start her, an engineer sputtered. With that patch. Yes, Dawson said. Machines don't lie. If it holds, she'll tell us. Brielle's pulse hammered. The Lyra was her empire's crown jewel. Trusting this janitor's pencil and wire miracle was madness. And yet her hand moved before her pride could stop it. She pressed the ignition. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared to life. The crowd flinched as the Lyra's frame trembled, then steadied. The display climbed 30%, 45%, 60%, and then it leveled, humming low and steady at 70% stability. Gasps echoed through the square. Renee's eyes glistened. The guards stared open-mouthed. And Brielle? Brielle froze. Her world tilted on its axis. The impossible had been made real not by her algorithms or her pristine engineers, but by a man armed with a child's pencil. Dawson exhaled, rolling his shoulders, as though laying down a heavy pack. Told you, he murmured. For a moment, no one spoke. Then applause broke from the edges of the crowd, hesitant at first, then swelling. Executives who had mocked him now clapped as though salvation had come down from the heavens. But Dawson didn't smile. He only glanced at the pencil stub still blackened in his hand. Thank you, Marley. Brielle's lips parted. She wanted to thank him. She wanted to demand an explanation. She wanted to say anything that could mask the quake in her chest. But all she managed was a whisper, almost reverent. How did you? No, Dawson looked at her, his eyes steady. Because I've seen worse die, and I refuse to let this one join them. The Lyra's steady hum filled the night air like a heartbeat restored. Floodlights bathed its polished frame. The smoke now cleared the crowd, still murmuring in awe at the impossible repair. For the first time since the crisis began, hope stirred in the square. But hope Dawson Cole knew never came without a shadow. The crunch of tires broke through the applause. A convoy of matte black SUVs rolled to a stop at the edge of the campus. Their doors opened in perfect sync, and men in tailored suits stepped out, earpieces glinting beneath the lights. They moved with the precision of soldiers, not corporate staff. At their center strode a tall man in a charcoal coat. His hair neatly parted, his posture straight as a blade. His presence sucked the warmth out of the air, replacing it with a chill of authority. Lucian Park, the last man Dawson expected or wanted to see. Brielle stiffened as the newcomer approached. Lucien, she said, forcing composure into her voice. You're early. Lucien offered a tight smile, but his eyes never left Dawson. I had a feeling something would go wrong. Seems I was right. Everything is under control, Brielle countered. Control. Lucian's gaze flicked to the Lyra, then back to Dawson. From what I see, you've let a disgraced janitor lay his hands on our flagship prototype." His tone was sharp, but his words carried more than disapproval. They dripped with personal venom. Dawson stood tall, saying nothing. The past echoed between them, heavy and unspoken. Renee, sensing the tension, stepped forward. "Mr. Park, with all due respect, Dawson just saved the Lyra. Without his improvisation, the car would be scrap metal right now." Lucian's lips curled faintly. Improvisation or sabotage disguised as heroics, the crowd shifted uneasily. Whispers spread like wildfire. The same people who moments ago had clapped for Dawson now doubted again, pulled back by Lucien's cold authority. Brielle's jaw clenched. Enough games. Dawson predicted the failure 12 years ago. He filed the original memo. He was right then, and he was right tonight. Lucian's gaze darkened. "I know exactly who he is. He's the man I removed from the Corps." Gasps rippled through the gathered engineers. Even Brielle blinked in shock. "You?" she asked. Lucian stepped closer, his voice carrying the weight of old wounds. "I was the one who signed the discharge order. For insubordination, for reckless endangerment, for refusing to follow protocol." He turned to the crowd. "And now you trust him with the most advanced machine in the world." Dawson finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "Protocol would have gotten 4 men killed that day, including you." Lucian's jaw twitched, a flash of memory crossing his face before he masked it. "You broke the chain of command. I saved lives." Their eyes locked, the weight of a decade's resentment tightening like a wire between them. Dawson saw again the tribunal room, Lucian's signature condemning him, stripping him of his rank, his honor. A soldier's death without a grave. And now Lucian stood before him, not as a military officer, but as Halotech's head of security, still in power, still pulling strings, still branding Dawson as the enemy. Brielle stepped between them, her voice sharp. "This isn't about old battles. This is about Halotech. The Lyra lives because of him, and I won't let you spin this into something else." Lucian's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Brielle. You don't know who you're letting in." Her lips tightened. "And you don't know who you've been keeping out." The countdown on the Lyra's console beeped again, reminding them all that stability wasn't permanent. Dawson turned back to the machine. "If we waste time fighting, she won't last another 10 minutes. Renee glanced nervously between Brielle and Lucian. "He's right. We need to finish the stabilization sequence." Lucien folded his arms. "Then let my team handle it. Men who actually belong here." "No," Brielle said firmly. "Dawson stays." It was the first time she had openly defied Lucien. For a heartbeat, the square seemed to stop. Lucian's composure cracked the mask, slipping just enough to reveal anger simmering beneath. "You'll regret this," he hissed. Dawson bent back over the Lyra, his fingers already adjusting the graphite patch, tightening the copper seal. He didn't need Lucian's approval. He didn't even need Brielle's. He worked for one reason alone, Marley's voice in his head, reminding him that broken things could be made whole again. But as he worked, he felt Lucian stare like a blade at his back. Old wounds bled into the present, and Dawson knew this fight wasn't about machines anymore. It was about truth, about redemption, about finally facing the man who had buried him alive. The Lyra's hum steadied, rising stronger now as if choosing sides. The crowd leaned in, eyes wide, breaths held. Brielle spoke softly, almost to herself. Maybe perfection isn't about control. Maybe it's about knowing who to trust. Lucien heard her, his jaw clenched tighter. And Dawson, without looking up, murmured the only reply that mattered. "Machines don't lie. People do." The Lyra's dashboard glowed like a warning flare in the dark, the crimson numbers counting down with pitiless precision. 12:00. The crowd had gathered tighter, now pulled by the gravity of crisis. Executives, engineers, security personnel, all of them watching the battle, not just for the car, but for control. And at the center stood Brielle Halverson. She was the CEO, the face of perfection, the woman who had clawed her way up from scorn to the highest office in the industry. Yet in this moment, her heart pounded against the walls of her chest, not from control, but from choice. On her left, Lucian Park loomed his voice, sharp and commanding. "You've given him enough rope. Cut it before he strangles us all. Pull him out and let my team handle this." On her right, Dawson Cole crouched by the open hood of the Lyra, his hands steady as they traced wires and seals. He didn't beg, didn't look up. His voice was low, almost serene. 12 minutes. That's all I need. You pull me now and you lose her forever. The air was thick with tension, as if the entire square waited for Brielle's breath. Lucian stepped closer, his tone dropping to a hiss only she could hear. "You're letting a ghost crawl out of the grave I put him in. Don't forget, I buried him for a reason." Brielle's jaw clenched. Dishonorably discharged. That's the line you've been selling for years. But what if it wasn't dishonor? What if it was inconvenient truth? Lucian's eyes hardened, a flicker of fury breaking through his polished calm. "You're gambling your empire on a man who should have stayed forgotten." Her pulse hammered, but her gaze flicked to the car, her empire's jewel, the machine that carried not just her name, but her legacy. And she couldn't silence the memory of General Leonard's voice. If he says he can fix it, believe him. Dawson worked silently, stripping more copper wire, binding it around the graphite seal, like a surgeon stitching an artery. Sweat dripped from his brow, but his movements were steady, unshaken. He whispered under his breath, words only the Lyra seemed meant to hear. "Hold on. Don't die on me now." In his pocket, Marley's pencil stub dug against his ribs, grounding him. He thought of her sketch of the car taped to their fridge, crude and lopsided, but drawn with faith. She had believed he could fix anything. He couldn't let her be wrong. The engineers clustered behind René Dubois, whispering among themselves. One dared to voice it aloud. "He knows things we don't. He predicted the flaw. He stabilized the core. If we cut him off now, it's suicide." Lucien spun his voice like a blade. "And if he's the reason this flaw exists, if this is his revenge." The whispering died. Fear was always easier to feed than hope. Brielle closed her eyes for a moment, her mind a storm. Her father's voice rose unbidden from memory. "Never trust soldiers. They fix nothing. They only destroy." But beneath that, another voice whispered one she barely recognized as her own. "What if you've been wrong? What if the machine isn't what needs saving?" She opened her eyes. "Dawson," she called. He glanced up briefly, sweat glistening under the lights. "Yeah. Can you finish this in 12 minutes? His gaze was steady, unwavering. "I can finish it in 10. Lucian stepped in front of her, fury finally cracking through. "Brielle, don't be a fool. This man is poison. He's chaos wrapped in a uniform he no longer deserves. You trust him now, and you'll pay with everything." For a moment, her body leaned toward the safety of his certainty, but then her eyes drifted back to Dawson. His calm, his quiet defiance, the way he didn't plead for trust, only offered it. Perfection had been her shield, but maybe imperfection was where salvation lived. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Then, with a sharp breath, she spoke the words that shattered the silence. "He finishes the job." Gasps spread through the square. René's eyes widened in relief, the engineers straightened with renewed hope. Dawson simply nodded, once his hands already moving faster. Lucien's face darkened, his composure cracking like glass. "You'll regret this." Maybe Brielle said, her voice trembling but firm. "But I'd regret never knowing more." The countdown ticked, lower 0.09, 58. Dawson leaned deeper into the hood, his hands dancing across circuits. Sparks flared as he fused copper to graphite, the scent of scorched polymer filling the air. Every movement was improvisation, but not desperation. This was muscle memory, honed in deserts and jungles, where machines lived or men died. Brielle watched, transfixed. He was unlike anyone she had ever known. Not because he was flawless, but because he worked with broken things, as if they were worth saving. Her chest tightened. For the first time, she wondered if maybe she was one of those broken things. Lucian stood in the shadows, now his eyes burning with something deeper than anger. This wasn't just about the Lyra. It was about losing control. Losing the narrative he had written years ago when he buried Dawson Cole. And Lucian Park wasn't a man who forgave ghosts. The Lyra's hum shifted, a deep vibration coursing through the air. The console flickered, stabilization climbing 65%, 68%, 72%. The crowd erupted in murmurs, hope flaring again. Dawson tightened the final seal, his breath slow and even. One more connection. Hold steady. Brielle's hands curled into fists at her side. Her empire's fate balanced on a pencil stub and a man the world had cast aside. And she realized for the first time she wanted him to succeed, not just for the car, but for herself. The timer flashed, 0712. Dawson lifted his head, his eyes locking on hers. Calm, resolute, unyielding. You made the right choice, he said softly. And for the first time in years, Brielle believed it. The square had fallen into a hush. Not silence. Exactly, machines still hummed. Guards shifted. Executives muttered under their breath. But all of it melted into the background as every eye fixed on Dawson Cole. He crouched over the Lyra V-12 like a field medic over a wounded soldier. Sleeves rolled up, veins standing out in his forearms. His tools were crude, stripped copper wire, melted polymer tubing the sharpened graphite stub of his daughter's pencil. But his movements carried the precision of a man who had learned to work under fire, where seconds drew the line between life and death. The timer glowed angrily, said Light Dawson said simply. One of the younger engineers, shaking, raised a portable lamp over the hood. Dawson's shadow fell long across the car's exposed circuitry, his hand steady as he probed the fragile heart of the machine. He didn't bark orders. He didn't waste words. He worked in silence, gestures, sharp, deliberate, each motion commanding its own authority. The square seemed to lean toward him, drawn into the gravity of his calm. Brielle Halverson stood only a few feet away, her arms folded, but this time not in defiance. Her eyes tracked every movement, her heart pounding with an unfamiliar rhythm. She had spent her life in boardrooms and laboratories, surrounded by polished presentations and scripted solutions. But this was raw survival, and it mesmerized her. She had seen surgeons in documentaries with less focus than this janitor-turned-ghost. Dawson muttered under his breath, not for the crowd, not even for Brielle, but for the machine. Easy now. Hold together. You're not done yet. It sounded less like repair and more like prayer. Renee Dubois whispered near Brielle's shoulder, awe in her voice. I've seen veterans patch helicopters in the field, but never like this. Brielle's throat tightened. She wanted to dismiss it, to chalk it up to luck or theatrics, but she couldn't deny the truth. Every flick of his wrist, every fuse of copper, every press of graphite had purpose. Lucian Park stood a few steps behind arms, folded, his expression unreadable, but his eyes burning holes into Dawson's back. He wanted the man to fail, needed him to fail. Because every second Dawson succeeded, unraveled the story Lucian had written years ago that Dawson Cole was reckless, dishonorable, a liability to be erased. And now here he was, resurrected, commanding the faith of a crowd with nothing but broken tools and unbroken will. The Lyra trembled as Dawson pressed the graphite seal deeper into the coolant valve. Sparks flared, reflecting against his determined face. The hum of the quantum stabilizer shifted, no longer frantic, but struggling toward rhythm. The console flickered, ability 55%, 62%, 68%. Gasps rose from the watching engineers. Someone whispered, "It's working." Brielle's breath caught. She had built her empire on perfection, but this was resurrection. For Dawson, the world shrank to the square foot beneath his hands. The crowd, the floodlights, Lucian's glare, none of it mattered. What mattered was the machine's heartbeat beneath his fingertips, the graphite pencil stub pressing against his palm, and Marley's voice echoing in memory. "You can fix anything, Daddy." He had failed many things in his life, his career, his reputation, even his marriage, but not her. Never her. He couldn't. His hands moved faster, weaving copper like veins across the Lyra's circuitry. The air smelled of ozone and scorched polymer. Sweat rolled down his temple, but his grip never faltered. The timer flashed, when Zordos 422. Status Brielle asked, her voice low but taut with urgency. Dawson didn't look up. 70% stabilized. Cores still bleeding. One more connection. "What do you need?" He extended a hand without hesitation. "Steady pressure here." Her heart lurched. He wasn't asking for an engineer. He was asking for her. Brielle hesitated only a second before stepping forward, her hand brushing against his as she pressed down on the graphite patch. The material was warm, vibrating faintly alive beneath her palm. "Hold it," Dawson said, his tone firm but calm. "Don't waver." She swallowed hard. "I don't waver." Their eyes met briefly hers, sharp with pride, his steady with quiet trust. And in that fragile exchange, something shifted. For the first time in years, she wasn't the one in control. And for the first time in years, she didn't hate it. The crowd leaned closer as Dawson fused the final copper wire sparks, dancing like fireflies. The Lyra's hum deepened, smooth and resonant, as though exhaling after holding its breath for too long. The console blinked. Stability percent, 76%, 81%. The numbers climbed. The timer ticked. AO2 58. Brielle's grip tightened, sweat dampening her palm, but Dawson's voice guided her. "Steady. Machines respond to faith as much as pressure." She almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Yet in this moment, it felt true. Then with one final surge, the Lyra roared. The sound vibrated through the square, powerful and alive. The dashboard lit up in emerald green stability. 87%, critical systems restored. The crowd erupted, cheers, clapping shouts of disbelief. Executives who moments ago doubted now applauded, as though they'd always believed. Engineers shook their heads in awe. Renee whispered, tears in her eyes. He did it. Brielle stood frozen, her hand still pressed to the machine. Dawson's just inches away. She had built her life on perfection, but tonight it was imperfection. Broken tools, broken men, broken faith that had saved her empire. Dawson leaned back at last, wiping his brow. He didn't bask in the applause, didn't even glance at the crowd. He only whispered, "She's breathing again." He slipped the blackened pencil stub into his pocket, his talisman of faith and fatherhood. Brielle exhaled shakily, her heart racing. For the first time, she realized she wasn't just looking at a janitor or even an engineer. She was looking at the kind of man her father had never been, one who stayed when things broke. And that realization scared her more than the countdown ever had. Lucian Park, standing in the shadows, clenched his fists until his knuckles whitened. He had lost control tonight. But his voice, low and venomous, promised the fight wasn't over. "This isn't redemption," he muttered to himself. "This is only the beginning." The roar of the Lyra V-12 filled the night like a symphony of steel and fire. No longer choking, no longer screaming, it purred deep and steady like a great cat, roused back to life. Its emerald lights glowed across the console. Stability? 70%. 78%. 83%. The crowd surged forward, faces alight with disbelief and wonder. Engineers who had doubted now applauded wildly. Executives, their ties loosened and pride shaken, clapped as though salvation had descended in the form of a man with copper wire and a pencil stub. Cameras from hovering drones zoomed in, capturing every detail, the smoke clearing the headlights flaring awake, the hum settling into a heartbeat that promised endurance. Within hours, the footage would circle the globe, a miracle in motion. But Dawson Cole didn't look at the cameras. He didn't look at the crowd. He only looked at the machine, as if it were a soldier under his command, finally standing tall after nearly falling in battle. "She's alive," he whispered. Brielle Halverson stepped closer, her heels clicking against the pavement, her pulse still racing. She had seen presentations that dazzled speeches, that moved nations, but never had she seen something like this. Salvation carved out of ruin by a man the world had discarded. Her voice wavered despite herself. How did you do that?" Dawson shrugged lightly, brushing soot from his hands. "You stop looking at what's broken, and you start looking at what's left. Machines don't need miracles. They just need someone who won't give up." The word struck her deeper than she cared to admit. She had built her empire on perfection, on control. But tonight, she'd seen imperfection save what perfection could not. The applause swelled. A board member in a Navy suit pushed forward, clapping Dawson on the shoulder with practiced cheer. "Outstanding, absolutely outstanding. Name your price, son. Halo Tech will see you rewarded handsomely. A bonus, a contract, a position, whatever you want." Others chimed in, the offers tumbling over one another. Equity shares, an executive advisory role, public recognition in tomorrow's press release. Dawson let them finish. Then he shook his head slowly, his expression calm but resolute. "I don't need money. I don't need titles." He wiped his hands on his worn jacket. "I just need one thing, a chance for the people like me. The ones you've thrown away. The veterans, the forgotten. The ones who can fix more than machines if you just let them." The words silenced the crowd. The clapping faltered, replaced by stunned quiet. Even the drones seemed to hover more softly, as if unsure how to record humility. Brielle felt the sting of shame in her chest. Halo Tech had built its empire on innovation, but in its gleaming towers, how many hands like his had been dismissed? How many voices silenced? She studied Dawson, his rugged face, lined with both weariness and resolve. And for the first time, she wondered if perhaps he was not here to save her company, but to save her. Renée Dubois broke the silence, her voice trembling with emotion. "He's right. You all know he's right. We've spent years chasing perfection in machines while forgetting the people who built them. Maybe it's time we change that." A murmur rippled through the engineers, uneasy but thoughtful. Some nodded. Others looked away, unwilling to confront their complicity. Brielle's throat tightened. Her instinct screamed to regain control, to remind them all she was CEO, the authority in the room. But another part of her, the part that had seen her father's back as he walked away, the part that had buried every ache in work, stirred awake. Perhaps control wasn't the answer. Perhaps trust was. Lucian Park, watching from the edge, broke the moment with his icy voice. Noble words from a janitor. But let's not forget this was his fault in the first place. All eyes snapped to him. Lucian sneered. That flaw, KJ407, his memo, his design. If he hadn't built it wrong 12 years ago, none of this would have happened. Gasps scattered the crowd. Doubt flickered again, as fragile as glass. Dawson straightened his gaze, locking onto Lucian's. "You know that's a lie. I flagged the flaw, and you buried it. You chose silence over truth because it was easier than admitting imperfection." Lucian's jaw clenched, but Dawson's calm voice cut sharper than anger. "I didn't build a broken system. I warned you about it. And I'll keep warning, keep fixing, no matter how many times you try to erase me." The quiet conviction in his tone landed harder than any shout. The crowd shifted again, doubt giving way to a different current, one harder to silence belief. The Lyra purred steadily as though affirming Dawson's words. Brielle stepped forward, her voice softer than she intended. "He's not asking for power, Lucian. He's asking for justice. And maybe we need more of that." Lucien's glare darkened, but he said nothing. His silence was an admission louder than words. The floodlights gleamed against the Lyra's hood, casting Dawson's shadow long across the campus. He turned away from the clamor, gathering his makeshift tools with quiet dignity. To him, the job was finished. The machine lived. That was enough. But Brielle watched him with a new ache in her chest, one she couldn't name. She had expected salvation in data, in perfection, in control. She had never expected it to come in the form of a man who refused everything she had to offer, except the chance to be useful. And as he walked past her, she whispered words she'd never said to any man before. "Thank you." Dawson paused, met her gaze briefly, then nodded once. "Don't thank me. Thank the pencil." And with that, he walked on his footsteps steady, leaving behind a silence that said more than applause ever could. The Lyra V-12 slept in its bay, humming faintly as stabilizers cooled. Engineers had retreated to their labs, reporters had been ushered off campus, and even the applause had faded into memory. But inside her penthouse office at Halotech Tower, Brielle Halverson lay awake, her eyes fixed on the ceiling as the city lights pulsed faintly through glass walls. She had everything power reputation the empire her rivals had sworn she'd never build. Yet tonight, the taste of victory felt hollow. Her machine had survived, but not because of her engineers, not because of her control. It had survived because of a man in a faded jacket armed with nothing but copper wire and his daughter's pencil. And that truth gnawed at her. On her desk lay the reopened file, Memo KJ447. She had read it twice already, but still her eyes lingered on the handwritten scrawl, the rough sketches, the blunt warnings. It was not the work of a dreamer, it was the work of a soldier who understood how fragile life and machine could be. Her father's voice rose unbidden from memory, gravelly with contempt. "Soldiers don't fix things. They break. Don't you ever forget it." And yet tonight, she had watched a soldier fix what no one else could. Her father's lessons etched into her bones, shaping her every ambition, suddenly rang hollow. Restless, she rose and crossed to the window, the city sprawling beneath her like circuitry glowing in the dark. For years, she had believed perfection was built in boardrooms and clean labs. But the man she'd dismissed as a janitor had shown her perfection didn't matter. Persistence did. Faith did. And faith was something she had never dared to give. On a whim, she tapped her tablet, searching through Halotech's security archives. Dozens of camera feeds flickered by until she found him, Dawson Cole, walking the empty halls, after the chaos, a mop slung over his shoulder, once again, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. He didn't bask in the miracle he had performed, didn't wait for praise. He simply returned to his quiet place, the forgotten corners of the empire. Brielle's chest tightened. She had chased recognition her entire life. Yet here was a man who shrugged it off like ash. She flicked to another feed, one she had missed earlier. His locker small and battered. A drawing taped to the inside crayon lines, crooked but radiant. A little girl's sketch of a man with long hair holding a wrench surrounded by stars. Her breath caught. Marley. The simplicity of it undid her more than any technical brilliance ever had. This wasn't about glory for Dawson. This was about being the man his daughter believed he was. Something in her cracked. She envied that kind of love, unconditional, unquestioning. It was the one thing her empire had never bought. She turned off the feed and returned to her desk, but she didn't open spreadsheets or press briefings. Instead, she opened her private files, the ones she hadn't touched in years. Family photos. A father in uniform, tall and unyielding. A mother's weary smile, and a younger version of herself, eyes wide, hand raised in farewell as her father marched away. He had promised to come back. He hadn't, and the silence he left had taught her never to trust men in uniform again. But Dawson Cole wasn't her father. Tonight had proven that. He had stayed. When everyone else doubted, when Lucian sneered, when she herself had nearly walked away, Dawson had stayed. And that terrified her more than abandonment ever had. The clock ticked past 3 a.m. Sleep was a stranger now. She leaned over the desk, her hands pressed against the cold glass surface, staring again at the memo. The words blurred, but the message was clear. Not every ghost should stay buried. In another corner of the city, Dawson sat on the edge of Marley's bed, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. She stirred faintly, mumbling, "Daddy, did you fix it?" His chest tightened. "Yeah, baby girl. I fixed it." She smiled in her sleep, clutching her worn teddy bear. And for the first time that night, Dawson allowed himself a faint smile, too. Not for the machine, not for the victory, but for her. Because she was the only reason he kept going. Back in her tower, Brielle opened a fresh document. For once, it wasn't a quarterly report or a speech. It was a single line, typed slowly, each keystroke heavier than the last. Perfection isn't the absence of flaws. It's the choice to keep moving between the gears. She sat back, staring at the words. They didn't erase her doubts. They didn't heal the old wounds left by her father's absence. But they were the first words she had written in years that felt honest. And maybe honesty was where healing began. Outside, the city stirred toward dawn. The Lyra slept, the world oblivious to the war fought in silence beneath its hood. And two lives, one in a penthouse, one in a modest apartment, turned on the same axis of realization that machines weren't the only things worth saving. Morning sunlight poured over the Halo Tech campus, casting long golden beams across glass towers. To outsiders, the world looked unchanged. The Lyra V-12 sat gleaming in its bay, spotless now, as though the night's crisis had been nothing but a fever dream. But inside, something had shifted. Brielle Halverson strode through the executive wing, her heels striking a rhythm of decision. She had not slept, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel hollow. Instead, she felt restless, haunted not by failure, but by possibility. Her staff trailed behind with nervous glances. Word of last night had spread faster than wildfire. Investors wanted statements. The board wanted assurances. The press wanted blood. Everyone expected the CEO to stand tall, pristine, unshaken. But today, Brielle wasn't thinking of cameras. She was thinking of a man who had walked away without asking for anything but a chance for the forgotten. And she couldn't ignore that. René Dubois was waiting in the strategy room, tablet in hand. Hair pulled back into a neat bun. "Ma'am," she began cautiously. "The board is unsettled. They want a spin last night as a controlled stress test. They don't want his name mentioned." Brielle stopped mid-step. "Erase him, you mean?" René hesitated. That's the word they used, yes. The anger that rose in Brielle surprised even her. For years, she had obeyed the unspoken rules of power, bury what was inconvenient, polish what was presentable. But the memory of Dawson's steady hands, of Marley's crayon drawing taped inside his locker, burned too vividly. "No," she said firmly. "Not this time." René blinked. Mambrielle moved to the head of the table, placing both palms on the glass surface. Last night, the Lyra didn't survive because of a memo or a team of polished engineers. It survived because a janitor refused to give up. That's not something we bury. That's something we build on. Her words startled even herself. She had spent her entire career proving perfection, but perhaps perfection had never been the point. She straightened, turning to Renee. Find him. Bring him here. Not to the garage this time. To this room. Renee hesitated, then nodded. Yes, ma'am. Hours later, Dawson Cole entered the strategy room with the same calm he had carried into the chaos. His jacket was still faded, his boots still scuffed, his posture still straight. To him, this was just another room, another fight. Brielle studied him for a long moment before speaking. Last night you saved more than a car. You saved my company's name, my people's trust, and perhaps me. Dawson didn't answer. He only tilted his head slightly, waiting. Brielle drew in a breath. I don't want you in a janitor's closet anymore. I want you here, in this room, helping me build something better. His brow furrowed. Better for who your shareholders. Her lips tightened. She deserved that. Better for the people like you. The ones who've been discarded, forgotten. You said you wanted a chance for them. I can give you more than a chance. I can give you a platform. Dawson crossed his arms, skeptical. And what's the catch? There isn't one, she said, surprising even herself with the honesty in her tone. I'm not asking you to be polished. I'm not asking you to smile for cameras. I'm asking you to help me create something real. A program. A center. A prototype, not of machines, but of people. He raised an eyebrow. People. Yes, Brielle pressed. Veterans, mechanics, kids from neighborhoods that have never seen a lab. We can teach them what you know. Not just the science, but the resilience. The ability to see worth where others see waste. We'll call it the Veteran Mechanics Initiative. Halo Tech will sponsor it, but you'll shape it. The room fell quiet. Dawson looked down at his hands, the same hands that had been branded, reckless, dishonorable, disposable. Hands that had built, broken, and built again. Hands that Marley trusted more than anything in the world. And now, this woman, this CEO who had dismissed him hours earlier, was asking him to put those hands at the heart of her empire. I don't care about titles, he said at last. And I won't be your puppet for headlines. You won't have to be, Brielle replied softly. This isn't about me. It's about proving that people can be fixed, too. Just like machines. His chest tightened. Marley's voice echoed in his mind. If a machine can be fixed, so can we. Finally, he nodded once. I'll do it. But only if we do it my way. Real tools, real training, real dignity. No PR stunts. A faint smile touched her lips. Agreed. Renee, who had watched the exchange in silence, scribbled a note on her tablet. But what she really recorded was something unspoken the moment Halo Tech stopped being about machines alone and started being about people. When Dawson turned to leave, Brielle called after him. One more thing. He paused. She hesitated, her voice quieter, now stripped of command. You said last night you don't need money or titles. But if you ever need someone to stand beside you, just know I'm here. His eyes met hers, steady, unreadable. For a breath, something flickered between them, something raw, unguarded, dangerous. Then he nodded, turned, and walked out. Brielle sank into her chair, her heart racing. For years, she had measured success in profit margins and press coverage. But Tode's success felt like something else entirely, the look in his eyes, when he realized she believed him. And for the first time, she dared to believe that maybe broken things, including herself, could be made whole again. The winter sun shone bright over Halotech's main atrium, transformed for the first time, not into a stage for sleek prototypes or investor presentations, but into something warmer, more human. Rows of chairs were filled, not with shareholders in polished suits, but with men and women in worn jackets, with veterans whose eyes carried stories untold, with children gripping small hands of guardians who had fought too long to be seen. The banners hanging overhead didn't bear sleek slogans about perfection. Instead, 3 simple words stretched across the glass wall: Veteran Mechanics Initiative. Cameras were there. Of course, reporters scribbling notes, lenses trained on the stage, but they weren't the reason the air vibrated with anticipation. The reason sat at the center, holding a crayon-colored sign she had made with her own hands. Marley Cole, 9 years old, her auburn curls bouncing as she swung her legs from her chair. The sign was crooked, the paint uneven, but its message glowed brighter than any neon. If a machine can be fixed, so can we. Brielle Halverson stood at the podium, dressed not in her usual armor of designer suits, but in something simpler: a navy blazer, sleeves rolled just enough to remind herself she was still human under the CEO title. Her heart pounded, but not with the fear of quarterly losses or hostile questions. Today it pounded with something she hadn't felt since she was a girl, something close to faith. She looked out at the faces, gathered hardened veterans leaning forward with cautious hope, young apprentices with grease already under their nails, engineers who had once dismissed, but now came curious. And then her gaze landed on Dawson Cole, standing off to the side, with Marley's hand clasped in his. He wasn't on stage. He hadn't wanted to be. But he was the reason they were here, whether he admitted it or not. Her voice trembled only once as she began. Last month, the world watched Halotech's greatest creation nearly fail, and they watched a man most of us overlooked, someone we labeled a janitor, a ghost, step forward and save it. Not for money, not for fame, but because he refused to let something broken be thrown away. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Brielle's voice grew stronger. That night changed me. It forced me to ask a question I had been too proud to face. If a machine can be repaired, why can't people? Why can't lives? And today, we answer that question together. She gestured toward the newly unveiled workshop space behind her. Rows of benches, tool racks, engines half disassembled spaces, not for elite engineers, but for the forgotten, the displaced, the kids with no place to go but forward. This initiative will train veterans, single parents, and disadvantaged youth in mechanics and engineering. We will give them the dignity of building, of fixing, of being trusted again. Not because they're perfect, but because they deserve a second chance. Applause rose genuine and thunderous. Cameras flashed. But Brielle didn't look at the press. She looked again at Dawson, and he nodded once the quiet approval of a man who had spent a lifetime saying little, but meaning everything. After the speeches ended, the crowd spilled into the workshop. Veterans rolled up sleeves. Children tugged at levers. Reporters scribbled furiously. Marley tugged her father's hand, dragging him toward the glass door at the entrance. There, a metal plaque waited its screws already drilled its space empty. She held up her crooked sign proudly. Daddy, Miss Brielle said this should go here. Dawson's throat tightened. That's your sign, baby. Your words. Marley grinned. Then you should hang it. You're taller. He laughed softly, lifting her onto his shoulders so she could reach. Together, they pressed the sign into place. The crowd hushed, watching as the childish letters became the initiative's first banner. If a machine can be fixed, so can we. Brielle stood nearby, her chest heavy with something she couldn't name. She had given 1,000 speeches in her career, but none had moved her like watching a child's crayon become a creed. For the first time, She wasn't the one holding the weight. She was sharing it. As Marley hopped down, Dawson turned, wiping a faint smudge of grease from his hands. His eyes met Brielle's, steady, unguarded. "You did this," she said softly. He shook his head. "We did." "No." She pressed her voice quieter still. "You taught me what I couldn't teach myself. That perfection isn't the goal. Trust is." He studied her for a moment, then allowed the faintest smile. "And you taught me something too. That even people who live in glass towers can change." The crowd resumed its chatter, but the three of them, Dawson, Brielle, Marley, stood in a small circle that felt like the center of the world. Marley slipped her hand into Brielle's, her innocent voice breaking the silence. "Does this mean you're part of our team now?" Brielle's chest ached as she looked down at the little girl. She had spent her whole life being the one others depended on, never daring to depend on anyone herself. And now, a child's simple question undid years of armor. She squeezed Marley's hand gently. "Yes, I think it does." Later, as the crowd thinned and the sun dipped low, Dawson walked Brielle to the edge of the workshop floor. The smell of grease and sawdust lingered, the sound of laughter echoing down the hall. He paused, looking out at the city beyond the glass. "I never wanted to be anyone's hero." "You're not," she replied, a faint smile touching her lips. "You're something better. You're proof that broken doesn't mean worthless." For a long moment they stood in silence, the weight of the past pressing close, and then slowly lifting. As they turned to leave, Marley skipped ahead, her sign now glowing beneath the atrium lights. Dawson glanced once at Brielle, his voice low. "You don't need me to teach you what you don't know. You just need to remember what you forgot." Brielle swallowed, her chest tightening. "And what's that?" "That nothing worth saving is ever beyond repair." Their eyes met, and for once she didn't feel like the CEO. She felt like a woman who had been waiting too long to hear those words. The Lyra's hum echoed faintly in the background, but no one looked at it anymore. The true machine had already begun to purr, the gears of trust, redemption, and love turning between people who had almost given up on each other, but didn't. And beneath the glowing sign Marley had hung, the world seemed just a little less broken. "Before we go, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Share your city, your state, or even your country. Down in the comments, I always enjoy knowing where this community is gathering from. And if this story touched you, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. That way, you'll never miss the next inspiring journey we share together. Thank you truly for spending your time with me today. Your presence, your comments, and your support mean more than words can say. Until next time, take care of yourselves and keep believing that even what's broken can be made whole again.